Tracy, will you join me? Tracy is an advanced markets attorney with John Hancock, very kindly volunteered to come on her travels around the country to share some tax planning ideas with us, because as you saw in some of my slides, it's a big need for all of us. Now, while Tracy is an advanced markets attorney with John Hancock, I have asked her specifically not to focus on life insurance, but she is a tax attorney, so that's where we're going to start. And I think the key thing here is planning and taxes, they always intersect. You heard from Greg, you saw the examples from Sam, from Homer. But Tracy, let's talk about what you're hearing most about right now.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and it's wonderful to be here. So I often get asked to talk about the life insurance side, so this time I get to kind of roll it back. But we always start with the tax, so the taxes are kind of what's driving a lot of what we do. So the number one question that we're hearing, or why my phone is ringing right now, is because of what is, or I guess is not happening in Washington. So what the question is right now is, what is tax reform going to look like? We believe and we understand that tax reform is going to happen this year. We do believe that this is going to move forward. It's still kind of in this position that we're not really sure what that's going to look like. So we have the budget that's been resolutions. The next step is to figure out what what they're looking at is that one big beautiful bill and what that's going to look like. But right now it's still kind of stuck in this limbo. We don't really have any indication of what is or isn't going to be part of that at the end.
But we do know that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as it stands, expires at the end of the year.
That's correct. What we don't have is a crystal ball. So we'd love to, I wish I did. It would make my job a lot easier when the phone starts to ring. But we really at this point are still kind of in the dark.
So under the current law, let's talk about it, because as an accountant and as an attorney, we have to do with what we have in front of us.
Yeah, so right now, as of today, the current law is still that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is scheduled to sunset as of December 31st of this year. So right now, each person has $13.99 million of lifetime exemption for gifting and estate tax. As of January 1st, that's expected to sunset and expire under the current change CPI index numbers. That's going to go down to about $7.18 million. If it gets extended, we'll stay at about 14.4, I believe, is what the current estimate is. The other piece of the puzzle, it's more than just the estate taxes. The other provisions that are sunsetting, personal exemptions, deductions, tax brackets go back to those 2017 numbers. The big piece of the puzzle, or kind of what's driving a lot of what we may or may not see, is the 199A pass-through deductions. And the piece of the puzzle that might hold up things getting done is that SALT cap. So we do have slim majorities in the House and the Senate right now. We do have quite a few, or I think it's about 5 GOP House members that are from blue states, and they've said that they're not going to vote on a bill unless they get some changes to that SALT cap. So that could really drive what we do or don't see from a bill coming out. We are expecting to see that. I think Speaker Johnson has said that he wants to see a bill by Memorial Day. So we're watching.
But it's one of my favorite slides. I've seen you talk on this a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those things. The question is, what's going to happen? What do we do? And it's like predicting the weather. They say the weatherman is the only job where you can get it wrong and still keep your job. Well, predicting what is going to happen in Congress is probably similar to that. We really don't have a crystal ball for tax law. Even if we see the tax laws change and we get tax reform, it's unlikely it's going to be permanent. Tax laws change probably every 4 to 8 years with changing administrations, changing thought process, that sort of thing. So whether or not things get passed, they can come back. We'll talk a little bit about a provision that we started seeing. It was drafted originally in the 1980s. It took until 2018 to actually pass. And there's always those competing priorities. Where do taxes play in for deficits, for macroeconomics? We're seeing that play out significantly in the trade environment right now. But ultimately, no matter where tax laws go, no matter what is taxed, is not taxed, tax rates, our high net worth clients, ultra high net worth clients are always going to need tax advantage solutions. Taxes, no matter what kind of taxes apply to what kind of assets, are always going to be at play. And it's going to be up to the folks in this room to really help our clients work through those issues.
Absolutely. So let's start with income tax.
Yeah, so right now, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the expectation is still that it's, the current laws that's going to sunset. We don't know where this is going to play out. So I've kind of indicated what happens if it does actually sunset. Maybe they allow the income tax piece to sunset. There's been some talk about maybe raising the income tax rate a little bit just to pay for some of those other proposal options. So just based on today's law, what we're seeing from the current brackets to post-sunset brackets, if you want to just click forward for the next piece of this, we're seeing where the biggest focus area might be is for those clients in the income, for married filing jointly income brackets, income between $200,000 to $400,000 range. If we do see a sunset, if we do see income tax rates go back to kind of where they were at in 2017, we're seeing a lot of that bracket essentially go from a 24% tax rate to a 33% tax rate, which from an income perspective can be a really big hit for that subset of clients.
And a lot of you are planning in that space, just an awareness, a discussion as we talk about get ahead of it, have the discussions ahead of the time. A lot of us work in the pre-retiree and retiree market, so maybe we should touch on Medicare and Social Security and the impact on taxes.
This is one that doesn't always get talked about, and I'm going to kind of change the topic just a little bit. We know that at a certain point in time, Social Security does end up being taxed, depending on where the combined income is. But there's also the Medicare tax, or what is referred to as IRMAA tax. Essentially, what is your Medicare premium depending on what your income is? And I always like to talk about this as not necessarily what is going to be today or tomorrow, but kind of how that changes over time. So the explanation that I talk about, especially for those clients that are maybe already on Medicare and looking at income planning, for a married filing jointly couple, if their income is somewhere between, in 2025, $266,000 or $266,000 to $334,000, they're each paying $370 a month for the Medicare premiums. They don't really have a choice for this. This is an automatic tax, essentially. Now, if one of them passes away and we now have a spouse that's filing as single, their income likely probably didn't change all that much. They probably are still in the same income bracket, but now their single premium went from $370 to $600 essentially a month. So understanding that just because one, the shift essentially doesn't necessarily, the cost, that tax doesn't change because we lost a spouse. It just shifts the brackets into a different spot. So it's kind of another just interesting way of how taxes impact in a way that we don't always think about.
So the power of planning obviously comes and plays an important role. How do we, as planners, talk about this? What are the thoughts we should be having around where we're getting this income?
And that's really the point. And we heard about it yesterday afternoon. Tony talked about it quite a bit. We heard about it this morning from some of the folks on stage. Diversification is really key here. Understanding which type of assets, where's the income coming from, how each type of asset is taxed differently. We talk a lot about pre-tax contributions, those retirement accounts, after-tax contributions. Those are the assets under management with mutual funds, stocks, potentially annuities. We also often don't think about, or maybe it's not part of the overall retirement tax planning perspective, but that sale of a business and how is that going to be taxed? Are we looking at it from a stock sale versus an asset sale, and how does that play out from an income perspective as well? And we like the after-tax contributions. Those are those ones that we're contributing after tax. Growth is typically tax deferred. In cases like Roth IRAs, muni bonds, withdrawals are often accessed income tax free. And I know you told me to stay away from life insurance, but this is where this really plays in. Is life insurance not only is that after-tax contribution typically tax-free withdrawals, but out of all of these different assets, when we're looking at income planning for retirement, life insurance is the only asset that's also non-reportable. So no matter if we're accessing cash values, we're accessing withdrawals, that's the asset that does not affect adjusted gross income. It doesn't affect modified adjusted gross income. There's no reporting typically that's required to the IRS, no matter what we take from that policy. So that can really add in as just as a different type of diversification.
I love the fact that you spoke about life insurance. I understand you work for John Hancock and you're obligated, but no complaints from me. But let's talk about legacy planning and the impacts of taxes in the legacy planning space.
Yeah, and we heard this from the group just before I came on, as the implications and looking at the IRA assets and what do we do with this. And we talked a little bit about what are the implications of holding large IRA or large qualified assets in retirement. And this is where the taxes really take a hit on those types of assets. So qualified asset distributions, we're looking at ordinary income, increases to AGI, and this applies even to the Roth distributions. Even though they're not taxed from an ordinary income perspective, they still increase the adjusted gross income. They're still reportable. So that can increase things like Medicare's premiums and taxes on Social Security and that sort of thing as well. And when we talk about, we've seen a lot, that law that I said that was drafted in the 80s that didn't come to fruition until 2018 was the Secure Act. And after the Secure Act now, we can extend forced withdrawals or those RMD ages is out to age 75 for a lot of our clients. But we think about the growth between those years now, those forced withdrawals through RMDs can now increase taxes, are going to drain their savings more prematurely as well. So thinking about managing to those RMDs and not just pushing them out to the end, that might cause a much higher tax implication when we do have to start taking them. So this is essentially kind of just a picture of how that Secure Act, how the impact of that has from a tax perspective, not just for those folks that forcing them to take those RMDs. Maybe, again, we went from 70 and a half to age 75. There can be a lot of growth on those IRA assets, and especially for those clients that don't need those assets to begin with. And we're closer to, the mortality aspect, life expectancy, so the RMDs are just going to be that much higher when they have to start taking them. We talk a lot about that as far as an impact of taxes. But what the Secure Act ultimately did as well for beneficiaries is require that a forced withdrawal within 10 years. So without allowing the beneficiaries to extend those withdrawals over their current lifespan, we look at an example of a $2.25 million IRA, or $2 million IRA for a 40-year-old that inherited a modest 5% growth. That account never really never depletes because it continues to grow higher than what they have to start taking for RMDs under the old stretch rules. They're taking $45,000 to $70,000 a year in distributions. Now we have to actually deplete that count and exhaust it within 10 years. So we talk about a beneficiary in their 40s, they now are required, if we do it over a 10-year span, that $2 million stretch IRA is required to take $200,000 to $300,000 a year in distributions. Now, just on the distributions alone, they're in a 32 to 35% tax bracket. That doesn't include all the other income that they have coming in as a 40-year-old in their high earning years. So the impact and the amount of money that the IRS gets from putting in the Secure Act and that 10-year time span, they're actually ahead because the tax implications are much higher than they would have been otherwise.
So obviously one of the strategies which we shouldn't talk about because it's life insurance, but high level.
Yeah, Homer, you and Homer talked about this already. So we call it, at John Hancock, we call it IRA maximization. It's really just being thoughtful about, taking those RMDs, maybe not waiting to RMD age, maybe taking withdrawals a little bit earlier once we reach that 59 and a half age mark, to progressively spend down the IRA that may not otherwise be needed and kind of shift that asset, again, from a diversification perspective, using that either to own a life insurance policy in a trust for a death benefit, maybe shifting a little bit for income in a accumulation type vehicle. And there's a lot of things we can do with other types of assets if we start to shift it from the IRA in trust planning, because we can add allocations and distribution provisions in trust that can mimic that stretch. So it doesn't require those spend downs like the IRA would.
Yeah, and long-term care also obviously plays into that. if you just read any of the literature out there about the massive impact it's going to have on people's retirement assets when and I'm saying when, not if, a long-term care event happens, and Kim's in the room, she can talk to any of you after this. Most of the claims we're seeing are over the age of 79. Clients in their early 80s are claiming, and some of them haven't started taking RMDs. They should have had potentially planned ahead, and as a planning team supporting you, we have strategies that can help with that, and some interesting strategies where you can even own the long-term care inside a trust, creating some estate liability if you borrow the money. So just reach out to us and we can help you with that. But talking about income and taxes in retirement, and where we can talk about some diversification strategies.
Yeah, so, and these are those, the risks in retirement. So looking at diversification, again, this is that, creating a situation where our clients have planned through wealth management, through understanding the goals, to make sure that whatever risk pops up in retirement, we have the right diversification to make sure that we're not depleting the wrong asset or access it. It may not be the right time to access a certain type of asset. It might not be the right time to sell the business. What else do we have put in place to make sure that everything kind of moves according to those goals? And this is something that we really talk about from a long-term planning perspective. So understanding the different factors that play in, what different types of assets can solve for different types of risk that might be associated with the traditional retirement assets and retirement savings that they'd be looking at.
So Tracy, where are we in terms of the income tax rate levels?
Yeah.
Do you think, I know it's foolish to predict, but are they low or they're high today, and where will they go?
So right now, they've been consistently kind of, I don't want to say stagnant, but even after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, we saw a lower tax bracket, lower tax rate, or higher brackets, lower rates. But they've essentially kind of been stagnant. Over time, we saw this kind of curve move quite a bit more. Right now, it's been generally pretty levelized. When we look at kind of what's happening in Congress, there's really only a couple ways for the U.S. government to raise money, tariffs being one of them potentially, as well as taxes. So when we look at the deficit and we look at kind of where the country's headed, and we look at Congress and Washington trying to raise money, the question becomes, where do they get the money from, and where do they raise this money? And taxes is definitely one of those areas that they're going to be looking at. Whether or not it happens now, with our current tax reform, there's going to be administration changes in the future, and likely taxes is always going to kind of come back into play. When we look at planning for the future, we want to understand that taxes are likely always going to be at play. So are there ways that we can kind of mitigate that starting now and kind of planning ahead, knowing that's going to be a case? When we look at kind of for our general broad market facts, so not talking about what Tony was talking about yesterday, but so for our clients that are really based in W-2 employees, they've got savings accounts, mutual fund accounts, managed money accounts. They're looking at a few specific places that they're going to get money for retirement. So most people rely on those two primary sources, whether it's Social Security or qualified money or qualified plans, pensions, those types of areas. Those are always going to be subject to income taxes. So it's our job and as planners to really take that holistic view and say, okay, these are the primary sources. These have always been the traditional sources for retirement. What are some non-traditional or some new ways, some innovative ways we can kind of maybe continue to use these buckets, but also shift a little bit and look for some diversification so that your impact in the future is lessened.
Very powerful. We've heard it multiple times throughout the last few days about diversification. I think the last set of taxes that we should chat about, which is probably your and my favorite area, the right-hand side over the tax fence as you look at the blocks of property are the estate and gift taxes. So.
Yeah, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time kind of getting into the weeds on what are the transfer taxes. We have the estate tax and the gift tax. We also have the generation skipping transfer tax. So this is important when we're working with grandparents, kind of looking at transferring money to that skip generation. That can kind of catch people off guard. We really want to make sure we're planning for that as well. But I'll let you go ahead. We'll skip through. When we talk about planning, there's kind of the layers of planning. So we have those exemptions and exclusions. Those are typically what we try to use first. Let's take advantage of right now. We're in an extremely high lifetime exemptions. We don't know where that's going to go in the future. It's kind of always at play. But it's a use it or lose it scenario. So in order to take advantage of some of these exemptions and exclusions that don't require paying estate taxes, we have to plan ahead to use them. We have to use them when they're available. So using the unlimited marital deduction, that's required to be filed at the time of death. If it's not filed appropriately, we lose that option as well. Same as the lifetime credit. It's determined at the time of death. Right now, it's high. The IRS says we're not going to claw back. If you use what's available at the time you use it, you gift it, you're good. But again, annual exclusion gifts, charitable deductions, a lot of those have to be used by a certain date. Anything, if we don't use up what we're allowed to, it's a 40% estate tax over that lifetime exemptions. And there's really limited options as far as how we pay them. Cash and savings, so that liquidity, an asset sale, which may or may not be the right timing, especially if we've got business assets or illiquid assets that we have to fire sale to pay estate taxes, and then ultimately, of course, our favorite life insurance.
Now, I would also say that for me, I think about estate tax as probably the only voluntary tax that exists. Mm-hmm. It's really your choice, or your client's choice, is whether you pay estate tax. With appropriate planning, you can avoid largely paying any or all estate taxes. And then how much you want to go to your family or the IRS or charity, your choice. Mm-hmm. But it's a voluntary tax. So I guess the question, is it better to pay the gift taxes now or pay estate taxes later?
So this is kind of a fun little exercise and something to think about. And if you're not involved in this type of planning on a day-to-day basis, you might not even think about how these things are different. So when we talk about, is it better to gift it away and pay the gift tax or wait and pay the estate tax, gift taxes are what's called tax exclusive, meaning that the tax is paid by the person giving the money away. So it's not removed from the gift, it's not included in the gift itself. So with a $1 million taxable gift, they're gonna pay 40%, so $400,000 in gift tax paid. It ends up being a $1.4 million total value. The beneficiary receives $1 million, but we've also depleted the estate by 1.4. If we hold on to that 1.4 and pay it as estate, included in the estate taxes are what's called tax inclusive, meaning that the tax is paid by the estate and it's deducted from the amount prior to the actual transfer to the inherited. So that same 1.4 would actually have $560,000 due in estate taxes, meaning that the beneficiary would only receive $840,000. So a little bit of quick math, but it kind of shows the difference between exclusive and inclusivity when it comes to a tax perspective.
So seeing that, we should talk about trust planning.
Yes.
And how to get stuff over that tax fence, as Paul talks about.
Yeah, so popular types of trust, these kind of get interchanged. This is the alphabet soup of estate planning: ILITs, SLATs, GRATs, IDGITs, CUPERTs, a lot of these different types of trusts. But ultimately, it all comes down to it being a grantor trust. So what that means is that it's essentially intentionally defective to the grantor. So the grantor trust and the grantor are considered the same person for income tax purposes. So there's no taxation on any income, or the grantor continues to pay the income taxes on what's in the trust on an annual basis, but they're separate entities for estate tax purposes. In order to create a grantor trust, there's certain powers that they retain, which can be very powerful when it comes to planning. So the right to substitution, loan provisions, allowing the trust income to pay premiums on a life insurance policy can be really important for planning and utilization of these trusts. Why we use these is with a grantor trust, again, we're applying the grantor's income tax bracket, which is a high bracket of 37% right now. If we have a non-grantor trust, the trust is actually taxed under these compressed trust brackets, with the highest 37% bracket starting at $15,000 of income. So a much higher tax implication if we're using non-grantor trust. We call that the tax burn. So using a grantor trust versus a non-grantor trust, the same $10 million gift, again, earning 5% annually over 30 years, the grantor trust with the grantor the gifter essentially still paying the income taxes, that trust value at the time that it goes to the beneficiary is now $43 million. If we have a non-grantor trust, meaning the trust itself has to pay income taxes, it just lessens the amount. It's that tax burn, what actually ends up costing the trust to retain those assets, and only about $24 million gets transferred at the end. So just a little bit different way of looking at it, understanding how taxes apply to the different structures that we use, and how that can change the whole dynamic.
Yeah, and also one of the things I love about the grantor trust and the grantor paying the income taxes, you can't always get enough of it over that tax fence. The lack of control or loss of control is a big discussion point with a lot of your clients, so that they can spend down their taxable estate and try and create as much as they can outside of the taxable estate.
And one of the biggest pieces of using grantor trusts is this opportunity to get the asset out of the estate at the value that it was at the date of transfer. So using things like discounting and other fund strategies, but ultimately gifting assets to a trust really allows us to get any additional appreciation out of the estate. So the trust is allowed to grow continually, but the estate never grows. So we're never going to actually pay the estate taxes on that growth. So it really gives us the option and the opportunity to allow that growth to happen without that taxable event.
Yeah, and as you see on the slides, the word life insurance does come up.
They're John Hancock slides.
It's Hancock slides, but the reality is, as planners, as fiduciaries to our clients, the fact that we should be discussing all options and ultimately guiding the client to the right decision is up to you. That's what we can do. But a lot of people just avoid life insurance. John Pastore teases me, it's the third rail, don't discuss it. But as a liquidity tool, as a diversification asset strategy, it really plays a big part.
And really the opportunity, the transfer of assets, getting the asset out of the estate, that growth aspect that's never going to be subject to estate taxes, that's going to be important whether or not life insurance comes in as part of the trust. It's just, we like to show kind of how life insurance can replace assets, cover taxes, those types of things. But that growth aspect, the value of that estate freeze is very powerful in and of itself. There's also, we talk about, the back to basis is what we call it. So they say, well, if I transfer an asset out to a grantor trust, I lose the opportunity to get that step up in basis at death. And basis planning can be very powerful, but the estate freeze and the appreciation and growth out of the estate is also powerful. So we talk a lot about looking at it from both angles, understanding there's going to be a crossover point between the growth aspect as well as the basis planning and paying taxes. So these are types of planning opportunities that we can engage in to really look at, if we're looking at life expectancy versus growth, there might be the appropriate time to make sure that we get the basis step up versus the appropriate time to say, well, the estate freeze is going to be more powerful. Always an opportunity to really look at that from a holistic standpoint. Again, back to the grantor trust rules, we also have the ability to do those substitution powers. So if we end up getting to a point where we're looking at, down the road, we've transferred assets out, we've got assets in a trust, those are going to be a low basis asset. Maybe we're more liquid in our own personal scenario or personally held property. Maybe it makes sense to do a swap of fair market value between the assets, bring the low basis assets back in for step up and get the other higher basis assets liquidity out of the estate into the trust. Again, all options that we can uncover through planning.
Perfect. So we'll finish off. We're out of time. It's been great. One of the things that I wanted to thank Tracy for being here, sharing her thoughts and insights with us. As a planning team, to have true assets and partners like Tracy that we can bounce ideas off and strategize and clarify our thinking and get resources like that. So Tracy, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you all for being with us. And I think I'm going to call up my friend Matt Ackerman to tell you where to go. Oh, yes. No, I'm just being told leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you.